Right now there's a social media challenge to get 600 subscribers on your YouTube channel without posting any videos. And Book 1 of the Holocaust Engine series comes out at a time when a lot of the critic reviews I'm seeing look like boilerplates spewed across a ton of books that the critic clearly hasn't read, in order just to make it look like they're reviewing books. And of course, all sorts of authors are leaving glowing reviews of their own books, trying to make it look like it's coming from somebody else in order to pump up their own work. So, this is an age where you can try and game the system. And if that's what it takes to find success, then that's just too bad for us. Steve and I aren't going to do that. We believe in what we're doing, trying to write something transcendent. And if we reach people ethically, then great. If not, oh well. Even with these videos, I'm not going to chase views or subs. No clickbait. I don't even want to cover a topic unless I have something to say that I'm not seeing anywhere else. And this video is going to be an example of that. In my Philip K. Dick video, I talked about good history and bad history, and gave the example of guns, germs, and steel as one of the bad attempts at historical interpretation. Really bad. I thought I might do an entire video breaking it down. After all, it fits really well with our series on the modern loss of transcendence because that's the author, Jared Diamond's, premise. A materialist, so a belief that humans don't have a soul, that we're just flesh, interpretation of why some cultures rise higher than others. And he's all in. I heard an interview where he was discussing the belief called Geographic Determinism, where he essentially said that if we could just figure out the right formulas, we could predict any society's future based solely on their physical environment. So I did a search to see if there were any critiques like the one I wanted to do. The first to come up was from somebody called the Cynical Historian. But there were plenty of others, and I thought, okay, time to think of another topic. This one's been done. Just out of curiosity, though, I clicked on that first video. 1 minute in and addressing the question of why it was that Europe colonized the world, not Asia or Africa, the Cynical Historian said this.
This has never been satisfactorily answered. It's still a holy grail, and it probably just can't be answered, to be honest.
It is nice to have a purpose in life. The question of why the West came to dominate is called the Hegemony Question, as in, why was it the West that rose to unquestioned hegemonic power? And basically it looks at people like the Britons and says, look at these guys. Why did they have the empire that spanned the globe? Or, to put it more succinctly, in the world of Magnum P.I., why was Higgins the one calling the shots? And how on earth did he ever get his pants up that high? And so, I will now answer the unanswerable question. I will now answer the hegemony question. Now, if you've ever seen any of my other videos, you probably know that the answer is going to have to do with prevailing worldviews. But to make this point, let's look at a snippet from historical work that is neither a shining example of history elevated, nor one that's all that bad. In fact, Rise and Fall of Ancient Egypt is a pretty good book. But here, Wilkinson makes the mistake that I see again and again and again. He doesn't take differences in worldview into account. At all. Here, he presents the pharaohs doing things like building the pyramids as a form of propaganda. In other words, the pharaohs knew that this wasn't an actual stairway to heaven, but they just wanted to present it that way as a unifying landmark. Just another way to maintain control over the population, as if they were living in the 1970s USSR, making decisions from inside the Politburo. Now, people are people, and all people are different. Every one of the pharaohs would have had a different level of conviction in their culture's belief system. In fact, we know of one, and possibly a second, that actually rejected the Egyptian pantheon. But that's out of thousands of years and scores of pharaohs. No, most of them believed it. Of course they did. It was all they knew, all they were ever taught. And they had every reason to believe it. It was a system that afforded them every luxury that their society could provide. Heck, how many people today, given the same choice, would just go with it? And so we see a historical attempt at explaining behavior that misses the most obvious conclusion. The pharaohs didn't build pyramids to maintain power. They did it because they truly believed that when they died, they became the sun god, Ra. But then so did every other pharaoh. So how are you going to behead Ra unless you do something like build the grandest, tallest pyramid and so have the easiest ascension and show everyone else inside of the sun disk just who's boss? It sounds crazy, but this is what they believed. This was a world where people buried their fingernail clippings, shaved and burned their hair, even their eyebrows, because they were afraid that someone who had it in for them could find those things, take them, and use them against them as a part of a spell. So then, how do you topple a society like that? It's not hard. Egypt had one of the most impressive militaries of their age, but because of their worldview, because of their belief system, they had a huge, glaring weakness that we see exposed in the Hebrew book of Exodus. They might have looked impressive from the outside, but they were a house of cards waiting to get knocked over. Observe. The story of Moses is a narrative of a Hebrew raised in the Egyptian court, fleeing Egypt because of his Hebrew sympathies, who returns years later demanding Egypt release his kinsman. And for anyone looking at this story for a historical basis, not understanding the Egyptian worldview, the question has to be, why didn't they just kill him? I mean, they wanted to kill him when he left. Why in the world wouldn't they finish the job when he came back and started making trouble? The answer is so bizarre I feel sheepish just saying it. It's because they thought he would explode. I know. You think I just made that up. In the Egyptian system of magic, the sorcerer was able to perform spells because of his innate magical power, or mana. The scholars sometimes translate mana not as one's magical power, but as one's magical tension, like a rubber band that could snap at any moment. And that's a really good term for it, because in the Egyptian system, we have all kinds of records of the awful things that the Egyptians feared might happen if they got a spell wrong, if they even wrote a hieroglyph in the wrong way, and if they killed a sorcerer without casting the right protection spells based on the name of the sorcerer's patron god, then they believed that you could release their internal mana, like pulling the pin out of the world's most powerful grenade. Moses left a political dissident, but when he returned looking very much like a sorcerer, invoking the name of what he called Yahweh, I promise you that if they believed he was a sorcerer, they would have been afraid to do him any harm unless they thought they knew the counterspells to protect against his patron god. Now make no mistake, things like the plagues of the Exodus are presented as the miraculous workings of an all-powerful God, and a believer like myself takes claims like that on faith. But I include this here because you don't need the miraculous explanations to explain why the Egyptians reacted the way that they did. According to the Hebrew oral tradition, those plagues occurred over a period of several years, and the way that Egyptian society was structured, believing as they did that they had tremendous control over their environment, anyone in Moses' position could have simply pointed to natural setbacks and disasters as they happened and said, "See, I told you, you were wrong." Even the plundering that takes place when the Hebrews leaves makes perfect sense in light of their caste system based on magical power, and the fact that it had begun to look like the Hebrews had more power than the Egyptians did. Much like the way that our society is now trying to remake a caste system based on grievance, and so some want to pay reparations. After the Exodus, the following biblical passages have all sorts of references in regards to the differences between a pagan worldview and a monotheistic one. Look at the passage on screen. The passage I pulled this from lays out the blessings, so the benefits of their monotheistic belief, versus the curses, which you see now, so the inherently self-destructive problems associated with pagan belief. Let's just look at two of these curses for historical context. First, disease. The worst bout of disease the world ever faced occurred in the massive wave of Black Death that struck in the mid-14th century. At this time, much of the church had become paganized, and not only were they not doing any of the things like the 40-day quarantine prescribed in the Mosaic Law for infectious diseases, but by this time they were going all in on witch hysteria and they were actively trying to root out witches and their familiars, cats. What happened?
In the lead up to the Black Plague's arrival in Europe, tens of thousands of cats were slaughtered in villages and cities across the continent, and they became very close to extinction in Europe.
Which was a problem, because those cats had been keeping the rodent population in check. At that time, the rodent population exploded, and the Black Death came with it, wiping out something like a third of the continent's population. But what about this second one? Did soldiers ever really flee, even when no one was chasing them, because of a superstitious pagan belief system? In 324 AD, newly minted Christian Constantine had one battle left to become Emperor of Rome. How did he win the battle? He wrote the first two letters of Christ in Greek on a battle standard, mounted that on top of a rolling cart, and rolled the cart into the enemy lines. Now, you can argue that, yes, Constantine's men did chase after them and kill a bunch of them, eventually, but they didn't run from the people. They ran from the cart, very much like a certain pharaoh, not simply assassinating a political opponent because of his goofy beliefs that wouldn't let him. So how does this answer the hegemonic question? Fast forward another 1,200 years after the eastern wing of the Roman Empire fell to a rolling cart, and we find a Christianized Europe. Thanks to the printing press, actual monotheistic beliefs were penetrating deeply into society, which was about to cause a really ugly culture clash, but back on topic, it also created a society that didn't have the inherent structural flaws of pagan cultures. Suddenly now another, we call it prophecy, it was just a simple statement of fact, comes into play. Historians look at the chess pieces, like with this video, which does a good job of showing troop movements on a map, but as per usual, does almost nothing to explain why those pieces are moving the way that they are. We marvel at Moctezuma. How could you have taken your enemies into your own city? Why did you meet with them in private? Why did you let them take you hostage? What? Were you an idiot? No. He just subscribed to a worldview that placed everyone on a caste system stairway. His identity was wrapped up in the idea that he was on the top rung of the mortal plane, serving as a human gateway from the transcendent world to this one. All blessings flowed to the lesser mortals through him. And what happened to Moctezuma and the Aztecs was just an obvious example of a pattern that we saw repeated throughout the world. Pagan system kings presented with a problem. How do you maintain your position when suddenly faced with a group of people that appear to be above the caste system ladder from you? Well, Moctezuma did what several of them did. He tried to place himself between these strange invaders and his people so that whatever benefits, whatever blessings they could offer the people still had to come through him. No, the world wasn't colonized because of steel. In places like Central and South America, it wasn't even the conquistadors fighting the natives most of the time. In terms of the fighting, mostly it was the natives ready to replace their king in the caste system with these foreigners fighting against other natives. No, it wasn't farming. Get the right worldview, and even a group of primitive shepherds could turn the world on its ear. And no, it wasn't guns and germs. Consider this difference. During the medieval period, the last of the pagan peoples in Europe, the Russians, the Prussians, and the Scandinavians, were Christianized. Within a few hundred years, they were major players on the world scene. Compared to the Native Americans. When colonists began arriving to the American shores in the 1500s, the natives were, by and large, literally living in the Stone Age. What did they do when presented with horses and firearms, and then using those implements for hundreds of years? They became Stone Age people with horses and firearms. Why didn't their cultures change like the European pagans? Because the worldview that most of the Native Americans possessed wasn't so much paganism as something else called animism. And at some point I'll break down how this stuff works. For now, suffice to say that the key requisite for building any societal structure more complex than a tribe is to have a concept of heaven, or nirvana, paradise, or the Elysian fields, so some ideal state, and also have an idea of how to get there. Animism often lacks the first, and it always lacks the second. And without those, you can't even rise to the level of a kingdom. Because without that heaven ideal off in the distance, people simply don't make long-term choices as a community. They make choices on the basis of their immediate needs, on the basis of survival, and that's it. So, why Higgins? Because that word meek doesn't mean shy. It means self-controlled. In other words, world domination is nothing more than the ability to prioritize. And if you have a worldview that points you in that direction, then congratulations, the world is yours. This is David Reichert from The Bunker. Hit like and subscribe and click the notification bell, and we'll try and put out at least one video a week. Also, our pandemic horror series, The Holocaust Engine, is available September 14th. Link for pre-order down below.